This is Hope and Help with Doctors Michelle and Mark Sherwood. Insights and interviews with a dose of straight talk to help you enjoy optimal health in all areas of life.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again. And this is going to be a cool one because my guest today, Alicia Galvin, she and I have been on other broadcasts and other endeavors together. She is a stud with diet. I don't know how else to tell you that. So, Alicia, welcome. It's good to see you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So, Alicia, for all of our listeners that don't know you and don't know what you do, I do, but tell them what you do and who you are and where you are, etc.
Sure. I'm a registered dietitian in Dallas, Texas. It's going to be a balmy 70 degrees here, I think tomorrow.
Wow, we're all envious of you.
Which is nice. So I'm in Dallas. I am a functionally trained dietitian. So I've gone through the traditional route of becoming a dietitian, and then I've done additional training on functional medicine, functional nutrition. So I incorporate those principles into my practice. I'm in private practice. I'm currently virtual because I just had a little baby a year ago. And so I've gone virtual this year, which has been helpful. And my main focus is GI health. So I do a lot with SIBO, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. I've actually co-founded with one of my colleagues an online training course for other professionals, nutrition professionals, called SIBO Academy. And we've just launched a 10-week GI course, actually, that started yesterday. And so I love mentoring. I love teaching. I love the whole world of GI. That's sort of my passion. I also see a lot of autoimmune clients. And so I deal with a lot of autoimmune conditions, as well as infertility. So those are sort of my three passions. And that's my primary focus in my practice. So that's kind of that's me.
The word fertility worked with you pretty well because you have that 1-year-old now, I guess. So
that's that's definitely sort of a personal journey for me. And, nutrition, I credit 100% with the success of having my little son. And so that's been really fun. And I love to educate people on how to maximize their ability to conceive as well more naturally, using nutrition as the primary source.
And tagging on to that, we're going to talk about something today that's very important that some people might have heard of in the breastfeeding realm. It's this colostrum thing, and we would consider it nature's first food. So when we talk about nature's first food, and you and I share this passion and we use it with everybody, talk to us about your definition of colostrum. What is that and what does it do?
Yeah, so it's a super power food because every mammal makes it. So cows, sheep, humans, camels, any mammal is going to make colostrum. And basically it's the very first milk that a mammal produces after they have a baby. So it's technically the very first food that every mammal consumes. And so it's loaded with tons of good stuff in there because in the case of, bovine colostrum, which is what is mostly on the market for consumption and used as supplementation, it's super critical that the baby calf gets the colostrum and gets enough of it because that really determines the survival of the calf. And so, colostrum is super high in immunoglobulins like IgG, IgA. It's got lactoferrin in there, which has some antibacterial and antiviral properties. It has growth factors to help with the healing of the intestinal lining. And so it's basically the survival of the calf depends on getting enough of this colostrum. And so because of that, because of all the benefits and beneficial compounds within colostrum, it's really a superfood, but it's technically just that very first milk that all mammals receive.
It's interesting because a lot of people that are listening right now are going, well, wait a minute, how do I get that? There are colostrum products on the market, as you mentioned. And, I have one on my desk right here that I use really every day. I'll hold it up right there for you to see it, so you know what that is. But for those of you that are not visually looking at this, it's a Pro Colostrum LD from Sovereign Laboratories, actually. And again, this is just a preference that I have. It has a liposomal delivery technology, which I like. So this is what I use. So do you use colostrum too? Which one do you use?
I actually use the same one because it's the only liposomal colostrum on the market. And so I've used other colostrum brands with my clients. When I switched to using Sovereign, that's when I actually started to see an enhanced benefit that people were experiencing, whether it be from just settling of their digestive symptoms, healing of the intestinal lining. So the liposomal delivery is really key because it helps to maximize that absorptive value, and it's better utilized by the body. And so that's what I use on a daily basis as well with my clients.
Well, I agree with that because ultimately, I have used other sources as well and didn't get the results I perhaps wanted to with the healing of leaky guts, et cetera. You mentioned that earlier. And I suppose they've got the immunoglobulins, the growth factors, some lactoferrin in there. But nonetheless, I think that the delivery makes the product. And It's interesting. It's funny. I just was doing some research prior to us coming on about vaccines, in general, and they are using the mRNA vaccine, sort of a liposomal delivery technology as well. So it's not something that's unusual, even in big pharma world, but it is very effective as a carrier or a shield or maybe a cloaking device, if you will, to get it inside the system. So in this case, it won't get broken down before it can be arrive at the targeted location and do its thing, which I find is cool.
Exactly.
How do you use in your patients? You mentioned deal with the SIBO people, the UC people, the Crohn's people, fertility, autoimmune. Do you use this with everybody? And if so, how do you use it? What's the dosing of that? And is it oral or powder? What?
Yeah. Yes. So I use powder primarily because you're going to get better absorption using a powder versus a capsule. Yeah, I pretty much use it with everybody. Really, the only people who I don't use it with are women who are pregnant, because colostrum does shift the immune system. It has a very potent, what are called proline-rich polypeptides, or PRPs. And the job of the PRPs is to work on the thymus gland, which is the gland that is sort of the control hub of the immune system. And in pregnancy, there's a natural shift in the immune system to prevent rejecting the fetus. And so I don't use it in there because you don't want to be shifting the immune system in a pregnant woman. So that's one contraindication. And then I don't use it with anyone who's had a history of an organ transplant and they're on an anti-rejection medication. But other than that, I mean, almost all my autoimmune clients, even if it's not GI related, so if it's thyroid, if it's autoimmune diabetes, if it's lupus, any of the host of rheumatoid arthritis, because of the fact that of the shifting of the immune system, colostrum is very helpful in that. And in any autoimmune condition, there is an imbalance of the immune system. And so you want to try to rebalance it, and that can help with flares. I use it with people who have chronic diarrhea, even if it's just an acute bout. So if they've had like a viral illness and they have like a stomach bug and they're having a lot of diarrhea, I have them do as much colostrum as they can get in during the day. So up to 4 or 5 tablespoons a day. And that I have found to be really effective in really calming their GI system, helping them get over the diarrhea episode. And then I use it obviously for gut repair and also the immune balancing effects in Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, celiac. And then in SIBO, what's interesting is there's some data that has come out about the immunoglobulins and helping with bloating and some of the symptoms of SIBO. And so that's been kind of a cool thing. And it's typically very well tolerated because SIBO can be kind of a challenge because of the fermentation of the bacteria do in that small intestine. So you can get a lot of GI symptoms and bloating, and some supplements and foods don't work as well. But colostrum is very well tolerated and can actually help with some of the symptom management.
It's funny, we've used the high dosages like that too in acute situations with great success. And you mentioned up as high as 4 or 5 teaspoons or tablespoons. That's a lot, just comparatively speaking.
Yeah.
But for just a general overall, maybe maintenance of people, I guess 2 questions. 1, would you recommend that as general maintenance? And then 2, if so, what would be the dose of a general maintenance? Using the powder when we're talking about.
Right, right. So typically, if it's just kind of a maintenance dose, I do 2 teaspoons twice a day on an empty stomach. So, about half an hour before food or about 2 hours after they've eaten. That's general maintenance. Because of the sort of the lifestyle that we all tend to lead, where most of us have stress in our lives. Most of us maybe have to be on antibiotics. Certain medications. Even if you're well, there are certain things that might predispose you to have a more permeable gut, or the potential to develop a more hyperpermeable gut. And so I kind of like to have people use it just prophylactically, because unless you're, living somewhere and you have no stress in your life, you're going to have certain situations that are going to predispose you to potentially developing that leaky gut syndrome. And so I just think colostrum is a great tool that you can have on board that's very easy. Just drink it back a couple times a day, and it can really prevent the progression of some of these conditions. So yeah, I do offer it as a solution for just good general maintenance, even in the healthy population. I know, and you'll be able to speak to this, but it's been used a lot in athletes too, for recovery and just performance. And so very healthy individuals like athletes, which I imagine you use in your population as well, can have great benefit to having colostrum.
Well, I think that's an important subject, because the reason you would use it for athletes, and it just makes sense. I mean, the high level athlete's going to have a lot of intrinsic stress in their system anyway. It goes right back to that word stress, and just a little pearl for our folks listening. The immune system, really, in our genetics in general, have only changed 2% in 10,000 years. So the stress that we interpret right now is the same interpretation as if we were being chased by a lion trying to eat us. So it doesn't matter we're out running, doing high intensity training, or just dealing with listening to the media every day. The body's response is the same, and it tends to create that permeability in the gut, that internal stressor. And of course, that can downregulate the immune system, making you immunocompromised. So every single athlete we've had here, I'm always telling them, Alicia, to use this, because you're going to have leaky gut just because of the intensity with which you live and have to survive. And if you're an athlete listening now, this is one of those things I'm going to tell you, mandatory, do it, period, end of story, because it will save you a lot of grief over time. And perhaps, I really believe this, Alicia, I think it really would perhaps extend the life of the athlete longer in general, and also mitigate the long-term damage, because we know that high-level athletes don't tend to live very long because of the stress. So I think we can address it from, even longevity standpoint, but just a little, caveats there. Now, we live in a world right now, because here we are in the, the early to mid part of 2021. We never thought we'd get to this year, I know, but when we talk about COVID, we talk about viral. You mentioned something earlier that I want to really just kind of pick your brain on, and then I'll give you our opinion too. The idea of antiviral properties. Mm-hmm. Is that important right now in regard to COVID, in relation to this particular type of sort of food or supplement, however you want to look at that? And if so, how is that?
Yeah. So colostrum contains something called lactoferrin, and lactoferrin basically works to bind up free iron, which viruses and bacteria and fungi need in order to reproduce. And so lactoferrin can be helpful in preventing the proliferation of these, viral compounds. Actually, in the 90s, there has been quite a bit of research done on colostrum and HIV and AIDS, and which is a massive viral situation. So and with good success, with helping with a lot of the symptoms and the diarrhea that comes from it. And so, there are some very potent antiviral properties in colostrum, like the lactoferrin. And so that, in addition to just the general immune balancing properties in the PRPs, like I mentioned earlier, to help with, if you do have a viral load and activation of the immune system, it can help to just kind of help to rebalance that. Not saying I don't think you or I are here to say that it's going to cure COVID or that it's going to be, the solution to COVID or, this virus that we're dealing with. But, as part of just an overall general healthy lifestyle, there may be some benefits to incorporating it on a daily basis.
I agree totally and wholeheartedly. And there's a couple other things that we've learned and observed. One is just a study that was done several years ago that identified the lactoferrin specifically as being able to identify and sort of bind to those spike proteins in the virus, meaning it could, for lack of a better term, gunk them up so they couldn't stick as well in the ACE2 receptivity up here in the mucosa. That's one thing. But the interesting thing that I find is fascinating is because you look at COVID infected patients that have, lots of symptoms, lots of acute symptoms, trouble breathing. We know that there's a red blood cell problem because they're not carrying oxygen. In every one of those, their iron has been high, every single one of them, and it makes sense. And so I suspect that it's the excessive iron that's creating a problem. And so based upon that, we put, the colostrum into, personally, our protocol that we do. And again, we're not saying it's a cure or not. We want to make clear of that, but we put it in our protocol because of our belief that and our clinical experience that it will mop up that unsequestered iron. And so we think it's a really significant piece to the puzzle, perhaps, of modulating the overall immune response picture in a beneficial way. So, I just find it fascinating. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Would you say, and I think we answered this question, but, people have poor gut health today because of the standard American diet in general, the standard American lifestyle. You deal with people specifically in the GI area, as we've talked before a few times. Would you say that this is a critical piece? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but would you say this is a critical piece to your belief system and your protocol that you put in the behalf of your patients?
Yeah. If I have somebody who's coming in and they're, maybe they're super sensitive, or maybe financially they can't afford to do a whole bunch of supplements, or they can't do this whole big gut protocol of, gut repair. I start with colostrum, and sometimes that'll be the only thing that I use because it hits on so many different levels. It hits the gut repair, it hits the immune balancing, it hits the antimicrobial, it hits the prebiotic. There's, data to show that it helps with enhancing, probiotics in our gut. So it's one of those things, and it's a powder that I like, so I can titrate it up. So if someone is very sensitive, or if they, have a harder time sometimes tolerating it, sometimes I'll just have people start with just like a lick on their finger, and then just work up from there. It's something that I think can be a very effective, just as a singular use product, and so, it's really beneficial, and that's really how I like to use it. And then if people are able to do a higher level of a protocol or include more things, and I'll get a little bit more specific with that and incorporate things to individualize it. But sometimes I just use that as its only thing that I start people on.
Talk to us, if you can, about, I know you mentioned earlier that it's 30 minutes before food or maybe 2 hours after food. Mm-hmm. That's an important thing. So talk about that a bit.
Yeah. So you don't want it to interplay with any fibers or proteins, because that's going to lessen the effectiveness, the ability for it to get to the intestinal lining, for it to do its job, for absorption. So, you do want to have it on an empty stomach and mix just with water, if possible. So you don't want to be adding it to a smoothie. You don't want to be, dumping it into your super power drink that's got your power greens and coconut milk and flaxseed. You really want to have it by itself on an empty stomach, and so that you can get the most enhanced benefits from it.
Would you say that the colostrum is sort of a diva and likes to be alone and be the center of attention? Would that work?
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
So treat the colostrum, folks, as a diva, where they get all the attention all by themselves all the time, almost like a thyroid medication. So that's kind of a good way to look at it. I suppose one could take it with thyroid. I don't suppose that would be a contraindication. I don't know the answer. Do you have any comment on that?
I mean, I generally tend to be pretty careful with thyroid med just because it can be, in my people who, they kind of have all the things, it's okay. Well, typically I try to make it, and we try to work on the timing of it so that they're taking their thyroid medication. And sometimes we adjust when they take the colostrum so they can, it's not like they're up and then they have to wait for an hour and they have to wait, another hour to eat. And, it ends up being, 3 or 4 hours and they still haven't eaten anything yet. So, and because people sometimes get frustrated with that. So sometimes we have to individualize the timing of it and figure out when best works for them. But definitely the empty stomach is going to be key.
Now, a lot of times in these broadcasts I've done, and we've talked about this before, so what's coming. People wonder if we're just talking about products, talking about processes, talking about physiology, pathology, biology, biochemistry. What do you guys do? Do you guys do this? Really? What is your plan? So I'll zone in on that one right now, Alicia. Do you use colostrum? And if so, how? And what do you use?
Yeah, I do. I take it every morning. Just, like I mentioned, mixed with water, a couple teaspoons. And then usually I'll take it before I go to bed. So a couple hours after I've had dinner. And there's actually, if I'm remembering correctly, there are some neurotransmitter benefits. And so sometimes taking it before bed, you can get some of those benefits with, if I'm remembering that correctly. I don't know if that's something that you're familiar with, but for me, just the timing works out to where when I can get it on an empty stomach, it's first thing in the morning and then before I go to bed. And I use the liposomal. I've been using that it's probably been about 5 or 6 years now, or somewhere around in there, that I've been using it. And it's the only one that I'll do.
Now, what about breastfeeding? I mean, that's a question. You're a new mom. So talk about its application or not, perhaps breastfeed, because you didn't mention that as a contraindication.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, and there is some information here, is sometimes when the mom takes colostrum when she's breastfeeding, it sometimes can cause some sleep disturbances in the baby. Now, you can give colostrum directly to the baby as in sort of a supplement to breast milk or formula. So typically about a half a teaspoon to the baby a couple times a day. That so you can give it to your baby. And so I've had some women who, if for whatever reason they can't breastfeed, or if they're not producing enough milk, but they still want to have some of those good immune benefits, I'll have them do the colostrum, the bovine colostrum, and then in addition to the formula that they're feeding. It's kind of a hit and miss with breastfeeding moms, just because sometimes you can, and anybody who has a new baby knows that you don't want to be disrupting the sleep any more than you have to of an infant. So that sometimes just can be a little bit of a side effect due to the PRPs that are in there. So that's kind of on a case-by-case basis.
Well, and when we say PRPs, just so nobody gets confusion, we're talking about proline-rich polypeptides, as opposed to platelet-rich plasma. That's a different thing, but we use the same acronym, PRP. And I look at, I'm just looking at the ingredients on the label of this package, and I think a significant point of fact turns out the ones that we both use, is this has 25 to 30% of it immunoglobulins, and just by observation and experience, that's quite a bit more than you typically get from other supplements, I believe. Have you seen that same sort of phenomena?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing that I like about the whole colostrum is some of the other immunoglobulin products on the market are just IgG, or they're just immunoglobulins. They don't have the lactoferrin, they don't have the PRP, they don't have the growth factor. So you don't get quite the complete benefit of supplementing with something like this, a product like this. So I don't really use any of the just straight up immunoglobulin products on the market. I just default to colostrum because I mean, when am I not going to want any of those other properties to benefit somebody? So I don't really use any of the other ones. Kind of another thing that I had forgotten to mention with application is, for skin. So topically, I've used that also with people who maybe they have a acne problem, or they have an non-healing wound or a cyst. I've actually used that, and where nothing else was working, the colostrum topically mixed into a little paste actually helped. And eczema, it's actually worked well for eczema topically. Just leave it on for about 15 minutes twice a day. So those are just some other opportunities to use it, not ingesting, but from a topical perspective.
It's funny, you're the only other person I've heard of that did that besides us. We would just take it and teach people to do it as a night cream or a mask, and got really positive results from that for the same reasons. And the funny thing about this, and I want people to catch this one more time, is I was reading an article just recently about, back to the iron discussion again, that the excessive iron tended to be associated with less lifespan. And of course, the associations is not equal causality and causality. We can't do that. But the idea behind that was they were trying to tie the massive red meat ingestion we have with shorter lifespans. And perhaps there's something there. But at the same time, perhaps if we have adequate stores of lactoferrin, which is naturally produced in the body, we're just augmenting that. Perhaps that would tone down the excess iron, and that would probably be a benefit. Would you tend to agree with that philosophy?
Yeah. I mean, I think, probably multifactorial, but there's really no downside. There's really no side effect to colostrum. It's a naturally occurring substance that we all have. So it's like you can't overdose on colostrum. And so I don't think that there's ever I can't see, other than some of the contraindications that I mentioned. And as you've mentioned with lifespan and, this kind of this theory with the iron, I don't see that there would be any reason why you wouldn't want to, other than, it's just a routine that you do. So, there's not really a downside to it, I guess. It's very safe, typically very well tolerated. So yeah, I would agree with you on that.
It's interesting. I've had a couple of people ask the question, what if I'm lactose intolerant? What if I'm dairy intolerant? How do you handle that one? Yeah.
So I usually tell people, if you have a straight up dairy allergy and it's, massive horrible hives and anaphylaxis, I'm not going to touch I'm not going to do colostrum, even though, there's some research to show that it does help with allergies. I don't want to push that. Now, if it's a lactose intolerance, or if it's just a dairy sensitivity that they just have a little bit of a dairy issue, you can use colostrum. Colostrum is that pre-milk. It's the first milk. It does not have the properties of mature milk until day 5, I believe, day 4 or 5. So it's not going to have quite the same effect as true milk would have. And the amount of lactose that's in colostrum is actually very minimal. There is some, but it's very minimal. It's probably less than what people will be getting from just eating some cheese. Yeah. So even if they're lactose intolerant, even if they have a dairy sensitivity, generally they're going to do okay with the colostrum. Of course, there's always going to be an exception. But for the most part, you absolutely can use it in these people.
Well, and we've done that a lot. Sometimes people get created in their heads that they can't have any. And so to overcome that, we'll just give them a little digestive enzyme, a little bit of lactase in it. And that tends to, make it work okay. We haven't had any problems with it either. No contraindications whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And when we've been able to add the lactase enzyme that tended to remediate that problem. Yeah. Alicia, I know talk about this stuff all day, man. It's cool. Everybody needs this. I think we both agree with that. This is a baseline way that people can perhaps restore, regenerate, reverse ill health, and rebuild to better health, maybe better than you've ever been before. How do people get a hold of you where you are, and website, contact, etc.? How do they do that?
Sure. So my website is aliciagalvinrd.com, and my email is alicia@aliciagalvinrd.com. And then you can also follow me on Instagram at@aliciagalvinrd. And so those would be kind of the 3 ways that you can get a hold of me.
And we'll make sure to post those in the show notes below because it's good. One of the benefits that I have on this is I get to introduce my friends to my friends. And I think that's just pretty cool and rewarding because as you know, ladies and gentlemen, there are people in the world that actually believe as Dr. Michelle and I believe. And here's what Alicia, we're not the only weirdos in the world. There are more. So Alicia, thank you for being one of my weirdo friends. It's good.
It's a pleasure. Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so there you go, folks. Colostrum, nature's first food, nature's first milk. It's something we all need. Why do babies need that? Because they need to grow, be strong, rebuild and build up and do all the things they need to do to be a healthy human being. I guess, Alicia, I would consider us all potential babies in the making, but we need to grow up sometime. And probably colostrum is one of the things that we'd want to do all the time, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So I look forward to having you back on again. This has been good. We'll talk about maybe some autoimmunity stuff. That would be interesting and fascinating. So we'll schedule that soon if you're up for it.
I'd love to talk about it. It's something that a lot of people deal with. So absolutely.
Super common today. Well, folks, thank you for joining us again. Another edition of Healthcare's Missing Link. This has been fun. I've enjoyed this. So always subscribe and find out what and who's coming next, of course. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And play this one back. Enjoy. Review the show notes again. And above all, start using your colostrum for Pete's sake. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.
Doctors Mark and Michelle Sherwood and their clinic can help you find the hope and health you were created to enjoy. Go to sherwood.tv for clear, proven ways you can be healthier. Subscribe at sherwood.tv.